Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling a topic that, well, it touches everyone in some way. The healing of trauma. Forget the idea that trauma is some kind of life sentence. We're diving into Peter A. Levine's Waking the Tiger to explore not just how trauma impacts us, but actually your incredible built-in capacity to recover.
Yeah, and even transform through these experiences.
Exactly.
It's true. Think about those times maybe you or someone you know has gone through something really overwhelming.
Right.
And maybe experience these lingering effects that they don't quite add up logically.
Yeah, inexplicable stuff.
So our goal today is really to unpack what's happening beneath the surface, the physiological processes that Levine illuminates so clearly.
And what's so immediately powerful, I think, is Levine's central message.
Yeah.
Your body holds this innate wisdom for healing.
Absolutely.
And by understanding its instinctual responses to these overwhelming events, you can actually unlock a path towards recovery.
Right.
Now, what's fascinating is that Levine didn't just sort of arrive at these ideas in isolation.
No, definitely not. His work is such a rich blend. There's his own extensive clinical practice, obviously. His careful observation of our fundamental human, or maybe more accurately, our animal, responses.
Interesting.
Insights he got from a huge range of scientific research and even personal communications.
So a really broad base.
Yeah, this comprehensive approach is really key, I think, to the book's profound understanding of trauma.
Okay, so he built upon the work of others too. Who were some of the key thinkers that, shaped his perspective?
Oh, for sure. He certainly did. Wilhelm Reich's groundbreaking work on understanding the body's energy was a major influence.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That idea was explored further by Philip Kierkegaard. Then, the crucial role of self-acceptance in healing, that came from people like Richard Olney and Richard Price.
Self-acceptance, right.
Levine also drew inspiration from Ida Rolf. She really embodied that perspective of being both a scientist and a healer.
Like Rolfing?
Exactly. Dr. Virginia Johnson contributed to his understanding of altered states of consciousness, while Ernst Gellhorn's neurophysiological thinking provided a really crucial framework.
Scientific backbone.
Definitely. And finally, Dr. Austin's work really solidified Levine's understanding of that deep, inseparable connection between our body and mind, that sort of welded unity, as Austin put it.
So with this foundation, let's get to the core difference in Levine's approach.
Yeah.
How does his understanding of trauma differ from what we might typically hear?
Well, traditionally, modern medicine and psychology have largely focused on trauma as, a psychological or mental health issue.
Right, in the head.
Pretty much. And while the idea of a mind-body connection is often acknowledged, Levine argues that its importance, particularly in healing from trauma, is just vastly underestimated.
Right. We often focus on the thoughts and emotions tied to the trauma. But he's saying there's this deeper physiological layer that's absolutely key.
Exactly. And it's not a new idea, really. For centuries, Eastern and shamanic healing traditions have held a much more integrated view. They recognized the powerful two-way street between the mind and body. They understood how our physical state profoundly influences our mental and emotional well-being, and, vice versa.
What's striking, too, is that modern science, especially areas like neuroscience, is increasingly validating this ancient wisdom, isn't it?
It really is.
Showing just how intricately connected our minds and bodies truly are. So this isn't just some philosophical idea, it's actually being supported by contemporary research.
Precisely. Levine uses the term organism to highlight this interconnectedness.
Okay.
He sees us as these complex systems where mind, body, emotions, they're all deeply interdependent.
Like a whole system.
Exactly. And from this perspective, trauma isn't just a psychological event. It occurs when the body's natural protective responses to overwhelming experiences get blocked somehow, or they're incomplete. And that leads to those persistent, unresolved effects we see.
Okay, so if our bodies have these built-in protective responses, what are they, and how do they relate to what he calls the wisdom of the wild?
Right. This is where a really crucial insight comes in. Levine draws this powerful analogy from the animal kingdom.
Okay.
Picture an impala being chased by a cheetah. Just at that moment of capture, the impala might suddenly become completely still, like it's just given up.
Freezing.
Exactly. But it isn't a conscious decision. It's an instinctive immobility response, what we often call freezing.
Like when an opossum plays dead. I've always thought of that as just a last-ditch effort.
Exactly that. And Levine explains there are actually a couple of key reasons for this response.
No.
First, it can indeed be that final attempt at survival. The predator might carry what looks like dead prey to a safer spot,
Well, lets its guard down.
offering a chance for the impala to suddenly wake up and bolt.
Ah.
Second, even while being carried, a sudden burst of movement could startle the predator, maybe causing it to drop its prey.
Huh. So it's a real survival strategy rooted deep in biology. How does this connect to human trauma then?
Well, we humans, we often misinterpret this feeling of immobility. We even fear it because it can feel so much like death.
Yeah, it's scary.
We might see it as a sign of weakness or failure, but from a purely physiological standpoint, the ability to move into this state, and crucially, to move out of this natural freeze response.
The coming out of it part.
Yes, that is vital for avoiding the long-term debilitating effects of trauma. Think of it as an inherent survival tool we all possess.
He also talks about the triune brain. How does that framework help us understand this process?
The triune brain model, okay, it's a simplified view, but it provides a really helpful way to think about this.
Got it.
It basically outlines three main parts. The reptilian brain, which governs our most basic instincts.
Like survival stuff.
Exactly. Then the mammalian brain, the seat of our emotions, and finally the neocortex, our higher level thinking brain.
The rational part.
Right. Now, in life-threatening situations, it's the older, more primitive parts of our brain, the reptilian and mammalian bits, that really take the lead.
Instinct takes over.
Totally. And because we share these fundamental brain structures with animals, observing their responses to threat can actually give us valuable clues about our own trauma responses.
Okay. So when we experience something traumatic and we can't fully process it, what's happening in our bodies in terms of this energy he talks about?
Well, Levine proposes that the symptoms of trauma we experience, they basically stem from a kind of frozen residue of energy.
Frozen energy.
Yeah. This energy was mobilized in our bodies to help us survive that overwhelming event.
Fight or flight energy.
Right, that kind of thing. But it wasn't fully discharged from our nervous system.
So it's still there.
It's still there.
Yeah.
Imagine that impala, even after the cheetah's gone, still carrying all that tension. In humans, when this process of moving through and releasing that immobility state is incomplete, it can contribute to the development of things like PTSD.
Right.
But, and this is important, it's crucial to remember that our bodies have this powerful innate drive to return to a state of balance.
Equilibrium.
To that natural dynamic equilibrium. Exactly.
Right. You mentioned some examples in the book that really illustrate these points. Can you share a couple that stood out?
Absolutely. There's the story of the businessman's young daughter. She developed these intense night terrors after what seemed like a routine hospital procedure.
Oh, wow.
And despite being told they were just nightmares, her rigid body, the inconsolable crying, it strongly suggested a deeper traumatic response to what was, for her, a really frightening experience.
That really underscores how crucial it is to pay attention to a child's reactions, even if, as adults, we don't perceive the event as particularly traumatic ourselves.
Precisely. And Levine also shares his own experience. He witnessed a severe car accident.
Okay.
His initial feelings were panic and helplessness, but that was followed by this sense of profound numbness.
Shutting down.
Yeah, illustrating how dissociation or shutting down can be another perfectly natural response to overwhelming stress.
And then there's the account of the Chowchilla kidnapping victims, which is just a truly extreme example of trauma.
It is a horrific event. And while the majority of the children suffered significant and lasting trauma, one boy, Bob Barclay, showed this remarkable degree of resilience.
Outcome.
Well, Levine attributes this, at least in part, to Bob's active involvement in trying to free himself and the others.
He was doing something.
Yes. That sense of agency, that focused energy directed towards survival, it seemed to buffer his nervous system against complete overwhelm.
That's a powerful insight, that even in the face of extreme threat, having some sense of agency, even small, can be a protective factor.
It really is. And another compelling case is Nancy, a woman who struggled with panic attacks.
Okay.
During a therapy session, completely unexpectedly, an image of a tiger triggered running movements in her legs.
A tiger, but that wasn't the trauma.
No, that's what's so fascinating. This seemingly unrelated trigger led to a significant release of frozen energy.
Wow.
That was actually connected to a past tonsillectomy she'd had as a child.
This is where it gets really interesting. The tiger wasn't the source of the original trauma at all, yet it somehow unlocked the body's stored survival response from a completely different event years later.
Exactly. Nancy's experience revealed this vital insight. The very resources that enable us to survive a terrifying situation can also be the key to our healing, even years down the line. It wasn't about reliving the emotional pain of the tonsillectomy.
Right.
It was about accessing and consciously using her body's deep physiological capacity to finally complete that thwarted survival response.
So both Bob Barclay's active engagement during the kidnapping and Nancy's triggered escape response kind of demonstrate this principle, right? That the body holds the key.
Beautifully put. Yes.
Yeah.
They both show the body trying to complete its action.
So how does this understanding translate into actual healing practices? Levine introduces somatic experiencing as a key approach, right?
Yes, absolutely. Somatic experiencing is a therapeutic approach that specifically focuses on these instinctual bodily responses as a primary pathway to healing trauma. Levine's book is, in part, an effort to take the mystery out of trauma, to move beyond purely psychological explanations and offer a clear understanding of the underlying physiological mechanisms at play.
Got it. And a central tool in somatic experiencing is this concept of the felt sense. What exactly is that?
The felt sense. Okay, it refers to your internal bodily sensations.
Internal sensations.
Yeah, it's more than just identifying specific emotions like sad or angry. It's a broader, more holistic awareness of what's happening within your body.
Like what?
Like areas of tightness, maybe sensations of warmth or coolness, tingling, the overall feeling of being present in your physical form.
Okay.
Levine argues that this felt sense is the fundamental way we experience the totality of our sensations. And by learning to tune into it, we can gain these profound insights into how to actually unravel the effects of trauma.
It even includes a simple exercise in the book, right? To help you begin to connect with your felt sense.
Yeah.
Just noticing the physical sensations.
Exactly. Noticing your body in contact with its surroundings, the chair, your clothes. Right.
It's about intentionally shifting your attention away from just your thoughts and interpretations and focusing on the direct experience of your physical sensations in the present moment.
Okay.
The felt sense communicates the overall experience of your organism. It understands the environment through these subtle bodily responses.
He uses an analogy, like a river.
Yeah, think of it like a river flowing through a landscape, constantly adapting to the terrain. Paying attention to the ebb and flow of these internal sensations is crucial for processing and releasing the trapped energies associated with trauma.
It's interesting that he points out that in Western culture, we're not typically encouraged to pay this kind of close attention to our inner physical landscape.
That's a really significant point.
We tend to be much more focused on the external world and, our thoughts.
We really do. We've often become quite disconnected from our bodies and the inherent wisdom they hold. Learning to access and trust your felt sense is absolutely foundational to somatic experiencing and the whole process of healing trauma. Another concept he discusses is the orienting response. What's the significance of that one?
Right, the orienting response. It's your natural automatic reaction to any sudden or novel stimulus in your environment.
What was that moment?
Exactly. It involves a brief interruption of whatever you're doing, a moment of stillness, coupled with a heightened state of alertness as you instinctively try to identify the source of the stimulus and assess whether it presents a threat or maybe an opportunity.
So it's that immediate reaction that grabs your attention.
Precisely. However, and this is key, in someone who has experienced trauma, any seemingly neutral stimulus can sometimes trigger the frozen trauma response instead of this appropriate orienting response.
So they skip the orienting part.
Or it gets hijacked. Their nervous system might already be in such a state of heightened alert that it makes it difficult to differentiate between a genuine threat and something completely harmless.
And this leads into the discussion of our fundamental defensive mechanisms. Fight, flight, and freeze.
Exactly. These are universal and deeply, deeply ingrained survival behaviors.
We know fight and flight.
Right. Those are generally well understood. But Levine really emphasizes that freezing or immobility is an equally fundamental and crucial survival strategy.
But less talked about.
Yeah, for reasons that aren't entirely clear, it often gets less attention in broader discussions of biology and psychology. It's often underestimated.
He makes a strong case that no animal, including us humans, has conscious control over whether or not we freeze in response to a perceived life-threatening situation.
Absolutely not. It's an automatic, instinctual reaction.
So our thinking brain can't stop it.
That's right. Our neocortex, that rational part of our brain, it can't simply override these deeply rooted defense mechanisms in the moment of extreme threat.
Got it.
However, a key difference between animals and humans lies in what happens after the threat has passed. Animals naturally discharge the intense energy mobilized for survival. They do it through physical releases like shaking, trembling.
You see dogs do that sometimes.
Exactly. And that allows them to return relatively quickly to a state of calm. Humans, on the other hand, well, we can become stuck in that immobility state.
Why?
Due to interference from our neocortex, we overthink the experience. We fear the intense emotions that might arise during the release.
Like the shaking or crying.
Yeah. And there's often that unconscious association of the feeling of immobility with death itself, which is terrifying.
This brings us to the crucial understanding of how pathology becomes biology, how this natural freezing response can become a chronic issue after trauma.
Right. In post-traumatic anxiety, that state of immobility isn't just a lingering echo of the original trauma. It's actually being actively maintained from within.
Maintained how?
By the fear of re-experiencing the overwhelming terror, the rage, even that death-like sensation of being frozen. It keeps the nervous system locked in this defensive posture.
So it's a cycle.
It becomes a kind of vicious circle. The very fear of those intense emotions actually reactivates and prolongs the immobility.
We talked about Nancy's case earlier with the tiger image. How did her experience illustrate this thawing of that frozen state?
Well, in Nancy's situation, that unexpected image of the tiger triggered a physical escape response. The urge to run, the movements in her legs.
Okay.
This allowed the pent-up frozen energy associated with her earlier tonsillectomy trauma to finally begin to discharge, breaking that persistent cycle of immobility she was stuck in.
And then there's the concept of renegotiation that he illustrates with Marius's story. How does that differ from Nancy's experience? Renegotiation sounds gentler.
It often is. Marius's case demonstrates a more gradual process. Renegotiation involves carefully and patiently working through the traumatic experience by paying close attention to bodily sensations.
The felt sense again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And consciously accessing internal positive resources.
Positive resources, like what?
In Marius's case, a positive memory of a comforting experience with some fur pants.
Fur pants.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That became a resource, something positive to anchor to that helped him incrementally process the traumatic memory of being attacked by dogs.
So while Nancy's release was more sudden and triggered externally, Marius's was a more step-by-step, resource-based process guided internally.
Exactly. Somatic experiencing often uses this kind of gradual step-by-step approach, using the felt sense as a guiding compass.
Okay.
This renegotiation process helps to restore resources like a sense of agency, aggression, competence, things that might have been unavailable or just overwhelmed during the original traumatic event.
Got it.
Also, fully completing that initial orienting response, that what was that check-in, is really crucial for separating the feeling of fear from the inherent excitement and aliveness of just being alive.
Let's shift our focus slightly to the core of the traumatic reaction itself. What are the key components that Levine identifies?
Okay. He outlines 4 primary components: arousal, constriction, dissociation, and helplessness.
Arousal, constriction, dissociation, helplessness.
Right. Now, these are all natural responses to a perceived threat, but when they occur together and persist over time, they are strong indicators of unresolved trauma.
Let's break each of those down a bit. What does he mean by arousal in this context? Not just sexual arousal.
No, definitely not. Arousal here refers to the body's mobilization of energy in preparation to meet a perceived challenge or threat.
The fight or flight energy surge.
Exactly. This can manifest in various physical symptoms: increased heart rate, faster breathing, feelings of agitation, maybe difficulty falling or staying asleep. Levine emphasizes that this mobilized energy needs to find a way to be discharged for the body's system to return to a state of equilibrium.
Okay. And what about constriction? What does that involve?
Constriction is essentially a pattern of holding and bracing in the body.
Like physical tension.
Yeah, often an unconscious muscular tightening as the body attempts to protect itself against the full impact of that overwhelming arousal. It's like trying to contain the energy.
Then there's dissociation, which is a term we hear relatively frequently in discussions of trauma. What's his take?
Dissociation involves a sense of disconnection. This can be a disconnection from your physical body, from your emotions, maybe from your thoughts and memories, or even from the traumatic experience itself.
Like zoning out or feeling unreal.
Exactly. It serves as a protective mechanism, a way to kind of detach from the intense undischarged energy of the trauma.
Okay.
But it also, unfortunately, hinders the natural resolution process because it disrupts the continuity of your felt sense. You can't feel what needs to be processed if you're disconnected.
Right, that makes sense. And finally, helplessness. That seems like an almost universal feeling during overwhelming traumatic events.
Absolutely. That feeling of being unable to take action, unable to protect yourself, that sense of powerlessness, it's almost always present during events that just overwhelm our coping mechanisms.
So recognizing these four core components,
Yeah.
arousal, constriction, dissociation, helplessness, is a fundamental step in understanding the multifaceted impact of trauma.
Yes.
He then goes on to explain that if this core traumatic reaction isn't fully processed and resolved, a whole range of other symptoms can emerge.
That's right. If the defensive energy that was mobilized during the traumatic event doesn't get discharged, it can manifest in a wide array of other symptoms.
Like what?
Well, avoidance behaviors often develop. That's the organism instinctively trying to protect itself from that persistent state of internal arousal.
Avoiding places, people, thoughts.
Exactly. And what's important to understand is that even seemingly ordinary, everyday situations can actually disrupt the delicate energy balance in a traumatized person's nervous system.
So small things can feel huge.
They really can. And that thwarted survival energy, unfortunately, it can get rechanneled into what we often perceive as negative emotions, intense fear, maybe rage, hatred, even deep shame.
He also discusses hypervigilance, that state of being constantly on guard, scanning for potential danger.
Yes, hypervigilance, that persistent and often absolutely exhausting search for threats. It can be understood as another way the nervous system tries to manage this excess unresolved energy from the original trauma.
Like the body is still on high alert.
It's as if the body is still anticipating something dangerous is about to happen. Trauma can also impair our ability to take in and process new information effectively, which can impact learning. And that underlying feeling of helplessness we talked about. It can prevent individuals from engaging their natural orienting and defensive responses in future situations, potentially leading to a cycle of vulnerability or victimization.
Wow.
He also touches on the idea of traumatic coupling, where seemingly unrelated events can trigger intense traumatic reactions because they somehow resonate with the original experience on a deep physiological level.
Like a smell or a sound triggering something.
Exactly. Things that don't seem connected logically, but the body makes a connection based on sensation or activation level.
This paints a picture of a really complex and often unseen impact of trauma. He then explores the traumatized person's reality and this powerful drive for repetition he mentions.
Yeah. Denial is a very common initial response to trauma, as you might imagine.
Just pretending it didn't happen or wasn't that bad?
Right. It's a psychological defense mechanism, a way to cope with an overwhelming experience by minimizing or outright denying its impact. However, this denial often persists until the more primitive, instinctual parts of the nervous system feel sufficiently safe to allow the stored energy to finally be released.
So the body holds on to it until it feels safe.
In a way, yes. And that drive for repetition, he refers to that as reenactment, correct?
Yes, reenactment. It's a really compelling and often unconscious drive to repeat certain aspects of the original trauma.
Unconscious, often, yeah. Whether in obvious ways or very subtle ways. The underlying motivation for this repetition, Levine suggests, is an attempt to complete the interrupted process.
To get it right this time.
And ultimately facilitate healing, exactly. He uses the example of cheetah cubs playfully reenacting their escape from a predator.
Ah, okay.
It illustrates this natural review and practice of survival responses, integrating the experience.
But in humans, this reenactment can sometimes take very destructive forms, can it? It's not always playful like the cubs.
Absolutely not. Unlike the playful rehearsal of the cheetah cubs, humans who remain in a state of high arousal after a traumatic event may reenact aspects of it in ways that involve anger, a search for retribution, or even violent behavior.
Why violence?
Feelings of shame can play a significant role here. Violent reenactments can sometimes be fueled by a deep desire for justice or vengeance for having been harmed or shamed during the original event.
Right.
And it's important to recognize that these reenactments may not always be a direct, literal replay of the original event.
How else might it show up?
It could involve associated situations, maybe recurring accidents, or even specific types of injuries that somehow echo the original trauma at a deeper symbolic or physiological level.
He transitions from this maybe heavier topic into a more hopeful perspective, discussing the possibility of transformation.
Yes, he does. Transformation, in this context, refers to the process of fundamental change that occurs as you move from a traumatized state towards a state of greater peace and integration.
Okay.
It involves significant shifts, not only in your nervous system, but also in your feelings and perceptions, and importantly, all experienced through your felt sense.
Right, back to the body.
Always back to the body. Paradoxically, trauma can actually amplify both the expansive and contractive forces within us.
Expansion and contraction.
Yeah, like opening up and closing down.
Sure.
Trauma intensifies that dynamic, and that, he suggests, creates a unique opportunity for profound and authentic personal transformation.
He uses the film Fearless as an interesting example of the complex ways trauma can manifest, even as seemingly fearless behavior.
Yes. That's a great example. The protagonist in Fearless exhibits both this apparent transcendence of fear.
Like he's invincible.
Right. But also, simultaneously, this underlying constriction and a compulsion towards engaging in life-threatening reenactments. It's complex.
So how does somatic experiencing help with that?
Well, it offers a path to gradually bridge these extremes, gently facilitating the healing of trauma through the integration of these seemingly opposing forces of expansion and contraction.
Okay.
He also introduces the concept of the trauma vortex, describing it as this intense, often explosive rush of life energy that gets trapped outside the normal, healthy flow of our experience.
Yeah.
Like a whirlpool of stuck energy.
And he shares Margaret's case involving sexual abuse, illustrating how this interplay between what he calls healing and trauma vortices can lead to resolution.
Yes. Margaret's recurring physical symptoms were deeply connected to her past trauma by learning to attune to her felt sense.
There it is again.
She was able to navigate between these healing sensations, maybe moments of calm or release, and the trauma vortex sensations, the fear, the constriction.
Giving between them.
Gradually, yes. Renegotiating the terror that had been stored in her body for many years. The crucial element in this process is learning to trust the inherent restorative capacity of your own organism.
Even when good feelings come up.
Especially then. Sometimes those positive sensations, the beginning of the healing vortex, get squelched because they feel unfamiliar or there's a deep distrust. So it's about learning to trust that natural restorative flow.
Now, a really common question, and often a big misconception surrounding trauma healing, is the role of memory. He addresses that quite directly, doesn't he?
He does, and it's such a really important point to understand. Many people believe, and maybe have been told, that the key to healing trauma lies in constantly digging up and reliving the horrible, painful memories of what happened.
Yeah, that you have to talk it all out in detail.
Right. But Levine argues that even a perfectly accurate recounting of a traumatic event won't necessarily lead to healing.
Really?
And it can sometimes even reinforce that trauma vortex we just discussed, keeping you stuck in the intensity of it.
He challenges the common idea that memory functions like a perfect video recording of past events.
Exactly. He explains that memory is much more of a reconstructive process. We piece together fragments of our experience.
Not a perfect playback.
No. And during a traumatic event, those memories can become fragmented, which might actually be a way for our system to manage the overwhelming emotions, to de-intensify things. The intense feeling of realness that can accompany traumatic images during moments of high arousal, that's driven more by the intensity of the associated emotion, not necessarily by the historical accuracy of the memory itself.
So our nervous system is constantly comparing our present experience to the past based on these levels of arousal and emotional intensity, not just facts.
Precisely. Emotional activation paired with an image can create what feels like a very vivid and real memory, even if it's not a literal, accurate recording of exactly what occurred.
So what's the takeaway for healing then?
Levine emphasizes that focusing on your felt sense, that direct experience of, this is how I feel right now in my body, is far more crucial for healing than relentlessly trying to retrieve a concrete memory of the traumatic event.
So you don't have to remember everything.
No. Healing can and absolutely does happen even without a complete or detailed conscious recollection of every single aspect of the past trauma. The body remembers in its own way.
He then steps back to look at trauma within a broader social and cultural context, which is a really important perspective, I think.
It really is. He raises a very thought-provoking idea that unresolved trauma on a large scale might be a significant contributing factor to widespread societal conflicts like war.
Wow, like collective trauma.
Exactly. He suggests that entire communities could unknowingly be driven into mass reenactments of past collective traumas.
That's a heavy thought.
It is. He draws a contrast between human aggression and aggression observed in the animal kingdom. He notes that within the same species, animals rarely inflict fatal or serious injury on one another.
Right, they have rituals.
And have evolved these ritualized behaviors to prevent such outcomes.
And he proposes that unresolved trauma may be a significant underlying cause for the extreme levels of violence we sometimes witness in modern warfare.
Yes. The lingering effects of fear, separation, prejudice, hostility that are generated by past conflicts. These can be seen as a form of mass trauma that gets passed down through generations.
Inherited trauma.
In a sense. He also references Dr. Prescott's research, which suggests a link between reduced physical contact with infants and increased societal violence later on.
Early bonding is crucial.
Highlighting the critical importance of early bonding and the development of basic trust. The project in Norway, he mentions, which involves gentle, rhythmic stimulation and nurturing interaction between mothers and infants from different cultural backgrounds, is an example of an attempt to foster this foundational trust and potentially interrupt cycles of trauma on a community level.
That's fascinating.
He stresses the vital role of witnessing, of having our experiences acknowledged, and community support in healing mass trauma. And ultimately, he emphasizes the need for individuals to take responsibility for their own healing as a crucial step in breaking these larger cycles of conflict.
In the final section of the book, he offers some very practical and accessible guidance on first aid for trauma. Not just for therapists, but for anyone.
Yes, exactly. He provides concrete, actionable steps for offering immediate emotional support in the aftermath of an accident or any overwhelming event.
What's the main focus?
The primary focus is on establishing a sense of safety, first and foremost, and then helping the person gently reconnect with their physical body sensations in the present moment, grounding them.
Okay.
He introduces the principle of titration, which basically means working slowly and gently.
Titration, like in chemistry.
Sort of. It means helping the individual bring up and gradually discharge the trapped energy in manageable increments, not flooding them, slow and steady.
He outlines the different phases involved in processing a traumatic event.
Right.
Like before, during, after.
Yes, from the period leading up to it, to the moment of impact itself, and then the immediate aftermath.
Okay.
And he offers examples of helpful questions to ask. Things like, what are you noticing in your body now? And the kinds of sensations, feelings, images, and thoughts that might surface in each of these phases.
What's key when supporting someone?
He emphasizes the importance of allowing time for the body's natural discharge mechanisms, things like trembling or shaking, to occur without interference. Don't try to stop it.
Let it happen.
Let it happen, and focusing on grounding the person in the present moment by bringing their attention back to their bodily sensations. Feel your feet on the floor, things like that.
Okay.
He also makes a really important point that even if seemingly fabricated experiences or alternative outcomes emerge during this processing, like, if only I had turned left instead, they are valid and real for the individual in that moment. They represent the nervous system's innate drive to find resolution and completion, to imagine a different outcome.
And he provides specific and very sensitive advice for administering first aid to children, recognizing that their experience and processing of trauma can be quite different from adults.
Absolutely. With children, it's paramount for the adult to remain calm, quiet, and physically still. Your calmness is co-regulating.
Got it.
Offer gentle and non-restrictive support, just being present. Observe the child's natural bodily responses, the shaking, the stretching, maybe sighing, and allow these to complete without interruption.
Don't rush them or distract them.
Exactly. Avoid the urge to immediately discuss the accident or what happened. Prioritize creating a safe space for that discharge, and then rest.
Okay.
Validate their physical responses and trust in their inherent capacity to heal. He points out that traumatized children who are connected to their internal sensations are often responding to very primal impulses from the reptilian brain.
The instinctual part.
Yes. And their healing cycles tend to unfold at a slower, more organic pace that really cannot be forced or controlled by the adult.
He shares the case of Sammy, whose over-controlling behavior might have been related to a seemingly minor fall.
Yes, that was interesting. Through play that involved elements of rescue and mastery, like playing Rescue the Doll, Sammy was able to gradually renegotiate his fear and regain a sense of agency related to that fall.
So play is important.
Hugely important. Levine carefully distinguishes between different types of play, though. There's traumatic play, which often involves compulsive repetition without resolution.
Just doing it over and over, stuck.
Right. Then there's traumatic reenactment, which we discussed earlier. And then there's the therapeutic process of reworking or renegotiating the trauma through play.
How can parents or caregivers help with that renegotiation in play?
He provides key guidelines. First, allow the child to take the lead. Follow their cues. Second, carefully distinguish between expressions of fear or terror and the excitement that can come with mastering something the escape should feel exhilarating, not just terrifying.
Subtle difference.
Yeah. Third, take one small step at a time. Utilize the cyclical nature of play. They might play it out, take a break, come back to it. Repeat. Exactly. And finally, offer consistent patience and reassurance throughout the process.
This has been a profoundly insightful deep dive into Peter A. Levine's Waking the Tiger. It truly reframes our understanding of trauma, doesn't it?
It really does.
Moving it from, a purely psychological issue to something deeply rooted in our physiology and highlighting our remarkable innate capacity for healing.
Absolutely. The core message, I think, is ultimately one of profound hope. Trauma is not a life sentence.
Right.
It's a physiological process that can be healed by understanding and gently supporting our body's natural wisdom and responses.
It certainly makes you think deeply about the far-reaching implications of this perspective, not just for our own individual well-being, but for how we approach adversity and conflict in the wider world.
Definitely. If this discussion has resonated with you, I would highly, highly encourage you to explore Peter A. Levine's work further, maybe read the book, and delve into the principles of somatic experiencing.
Yeah.
It offers a really powerful and hopeful path towards healing, I believe.
So as we conclude this deep dive, here's a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. How might a deeper appreciation for your body's inherent wisdom not only transform your own experiences of hardship, but also perhaps contribute to a more compassionate and resilient collective human experience?
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us.